Glory to the triune God. Welcome to Urho live session with our beloved guests Dr. Sarah Knight and Dr. Susan Thomas. My name is Princy Paul and I'm talking to you from Dallas in Texas. I will be the host for today evening, and joining us from Cambridge is Dr. Sarah Knight, and from Kerala we have Dr. Susan Thomas. So for the benefit of our viewers, let me briefly introduce our guests. Dr. Sarah Knight is a scholar in church history. She was born and brought up in Kerala in a Syrian Christian family. She worked as a lecturer in English language and literature in universities in several countries until coming to settle down in Cambridge in England. In the recent past, she changed discipline, devoting herself to the study of history of the Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church in Kerala, taking her doctorate from SOAS in University of London. And now about Dr. Susan Thomas. She is a professor of history at the Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit. And she is currently working in Kerala and in Kaladi. She did her doctoral studies under the guidance of the renowned historian and professor Rajan Gurukul at the School of Social Sciences in Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam, Kerala. She was part of the international project that digitized the sources of Christian history with the Central European University, Budapest, and the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, Minnesota. In 2015, the University Grants Commission of India awarded its prestigious research award for postdoctoral research for her on the topic Historizing Church and Community, Syrian Christians in the 19th and 20th century, Kerala. She's active on the ecumenical front and has represented the Syriac Orthodox Church in various forums. She was the vice president of the Kerala Council of Churches. So it was my pleasure getting to know these wonderful ladies, and I really consider it as a privilege to have them in our midst today. So welcome to our show, Sarah Auntie and Susan Auntie. I will be referring to them as Sarah Knight and Susan Thomas, but as much as beloved they are to me. So today we will be discussing a few things regarding your research. So welcome both of you to the show.
Thank you very much, Princy.
Thank you, Princy and the Urho. It's a pleasure and privilege to be here.
Okay, Sarah Auntie and Susan Auntie. So I have a few things to ask you. So, Sarah Knight, at the onset, the first question that popped up in my mind when I went through your research profile was how interesting and diverse it looked. So, there are very few people nowadays who want to discover the roots of their ancestors and dive deep into the culture and tradition of our history. So, and doing research in such an area would not have been at all an easy task, I'm sure. So, what led you to go into such a different topic for your research? Are there any specific incidents in your life that led you to this field? So, what would you have to say about your experiences which inspired you to do research in this area? Yes, Sarah.
To give you a very short answer, I wanted to write a book about the Syrian Orthodox Church in Kerala. And the motivation to do this came about in the following way. I came to live in England first in 1986. That was 34 years ago. I'm a Jacobite at heart, but I'm married to an Englishman who is an Anglican Christian. And because Jacobite churches are very rare in those days in England, I went and attended an Anglican church. During the usual coffee after the services, I was frequently asked about my church and my faith. Unfortunately, the questions always ended with, tell me, dear, did you or your father become a Christian? And this was a difficult question to answer, especially because very few people in those days had heard about Kerala, let alone about the Syrian Christians of Kerala. And also there was a lot of speculation among my friends when they spoke to me that Christianity was probably brought to Kerala by the European missionaries starting in the 16th century. As you can imagine, it is not polite to disagree with your older, elder and better people. So I normally kept quiet and gave some excuse and gave short answers and got away from that conversation. Um, However, in academic circles, people knew about Syriac Sisters of Kerala. I immediately realized this was also very sketchy knowledge because I was often referred to as uh, Serenite from the Martoma Church of Kerala. So again, it's not polite to correct people. So I made a point at that time to explain that opportunity came. I studied the subject. So I started reading on the subject. I was, of course, blessed by the fact that I eventually, after 10 years, about 1995, I came to settle down in Cambridge. And this is a university city. It's a city wonderfully rich in books and brilliant scholars who we can speak to or listen to on any subject, ranging from biblical scholarship or church history, doctrine, church fathers, etc. And an added incentive in those years was also that my father passed away, and according to his will, I inherited all his collection of books, which I was very fortunate to bring back to England. And I started reading. I think I must have read for 10 years running and realized it is a very, very complex subject, and that it was ridden with controversy. So I decided that just casually writing a book will not do justice to the subject. And I decided to study it again when the opportunity came. And the opportunity came only in 2014. And that's when I was free of financial burdens and I could afford to resign from my job. And I signed up for a master's course. I had to begin with a master's course in church history and the Syriac language, etc. It has taken me 6 years now, and I have just recently finished and got my doctorate degree.
Okay, Saranai, that sounds really interesting. So it is like a combination of financial factors, family, your own
Exactly.
surroundings, everything that contributed to this
Exactly.
for you to take this path in your life. I think that's
Indeed.
how people treat upon research. They do not like just go at a sudden moment. It's like there are various factors over that
Yeah.
happens throughout their life which inspires
Yeah.
them to move on to a certain subject. So that was very interesting, and I think we got an answer to why you have a lot of books behind you. We know now where that came from and how that really
Yeah.
helped you in your life.
Yeah.
That was very
Very much so.
interesting. So now,
Thank
Susan
you.
Thomas, moving on to you, what would you have to say about your experiences which made you take such a different area for your research? So, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. As far as I could remember, I was always interested in history. I think grew up in a family where reading was a part of everything and discussing were parts of everything. And my father, who in his official life was with the LIC, and we would get transferred every 3 years to a new place, to a new state, and he was very fond of travel also, so he would take us around for trips, and most of them I could see were, either historical monuments or things of culture and things like that. So history was always there. I think right from the fifth standard or so, when in Kerala people would ask you what would you like to be, I didn't have an answer for it. What then they would say, what would you want to take for your further studies? And then I would say history, and they would look at me very quizzically and give me a wise nod, thinking, she'll change as things go by. But I didn't change, so to speak. I finished my MA in the Bombay University, and I always had this urge to do research. Research was something that I always wanted. Probably initially it sounded novel to me. I don't know. Also because I was interested in it. But then in Maharashtra, there was nobody who knew much about Kerala history. And I wanted to look into Syrian Christian history. And here again, I must thank my dear uncle, my younger uncle, my mother's younger brother, who once I got interested in history used to tell us, we belong to a very good lineage. We belong to a Christian community which dates back to 52 AD, and our family was one amongst the 18th Brahmin family that was converted, so to speak. So that really had me interested. And what I realized was I wanted to work on Christian history for my doctoral studies. And since I did not know much of Kerala history, I decided to come down to Kerala, and that was where again my family members helped me to find a university, to tell me who all are the people who were there who could guide me around. And through family I met Professor Gurukul and I got into research. And when I went to him with my topic, he said, Susan, it's a very interesting topic for you, but unfortunately you do not have sources to prove it. And in history, sources is everything, because we have the adage, no source, no history. So I turned away from my pet subject, and then I took on matrilini. My doctoral thesis is on the dissolution of the Nayar Tarwad. So I took that on. Marriage brought Jijo into my life, and he was somebody who was so much interested in church history, its liturgy, and its heritage, and things like that. And we got really talking, and that was really the point where academic discussions would follow. Because till then, what I read was books that was written by laity about things, and as far as Christian history was concerned, not very much. I didn't know very much about it, I must admit. Um, the turning point actually came in 2005 when Professor Istvan Persil from the Central European University, from the Medieval Studies Department of the university, contacted us through mutual friends in the church. And he was here looking for Christian sources and basically Syriac manuscripts. So I also got involved in that hunt for manuscripts. We went around churches. And in these churches, I came across palm leaf manuscripts that were lying around, most of them unattended, that were just thrown off in some corners, gathering dust, half of them crumbling due to termite attacks. And when I would ask them, what is this? They would say, oh, they're just accounts. And that answer led me to think, are they simply accounts? And then I realized, no, there could be treasure troves of history, so to speak. So what we did was I was able to persuade Istvan as well as Father Columba of the HMML, the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, that we would digitize these Malayalam sources or the palm leaves in Malayalam at the time when we do not have any Syriac sources to digitize. And gradually we have built around 7 terabytes of materials, everything included. So we started taking photographs of paintings in the churches, of old things that were there in the churches and things like that. And these accounts for me, I realized, would become a key look into the socio-economic factors or economic studies could be made on church history, because you have such similar studies. Because my own guide who did his MPhil thesis was on the history of the temples through the temple records. So this is why I realized the potential of the whole thing, and that's how I got into it.
Thank you, Susan Thomas. Yes, so I think just like Sarah Knight said, even you had a factor, you had several factors in combination, especially family, and then even your life partner who inspired you.
Yeah,
And
very.
luckily, you had a lot of good professors under whose guidance you could do work. And it's really inspiring that you came down south just because you were interested in the history of Kerala. So those things are like really show others what it takes to do research in an area. And even when people told you really history, you did not like get discouraged, but it actually you moved forward in that path itself, and you could continue doing your research in the area of history. So that shows how inspired you were right from the start. So thank you, Sarah Auntie and Susan Auntie, for sharing what inspired you. So now that both of you have told us what was your source of inspiration and what led you to this path, can you tell us more about what your specific area of research is? What topics you did your research on? I'm sure our viewers would love to know more about that. So Sarah and I, can you tell us what exactly you did your research on?
I'll speak one or two sentences in Malayalam. ഇന്ത്യയിലെ ഒരു പ്രശസ്തനായ ന്യൂസ് പേപ്പർ ജേർണലിസ്റ്റ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ പേര് ഖുഷ്വന്ത് സിംഗ് എന്നായിരുന്നു. അപ്പൊ അദ്ദേഹം പറഞ്ഞു, അവനവന്റെ ചെറിയ ഗ്രാമത്തിൽ നിന്നും പുറത്തേക്ക് പോകും തോറും നമ്മൾ ഒരു യൂണിവേഴ്സൽ കാഴ്ചപ്പാട് കിട്ടും. So as I left Kumarakam, where I was born, I slowly became identified either firstly with Kumarakam, then in Bombay I was a Keralite, and then once I came to England, I was an Indian. And naturally, the question then arises in one's own mind, as well as one wants to answer questions to those native British people who ask you, who are you? So the question arises in your own mind, who am I? And this, combined with my interest in my identity as a Christian, was in many ways the calcifying factor, what settled the factor. So I decided to study the identity of the Jacobite Syrian Christians of Kerala as a result, because although I was brought up and almost lived everyday life as a Jacobite Syrian Christian, I really did not know its history or its the minutiae of its doctrine, or not much of a Syriac language, and also the universal history of the Syrian Orthodox Church in Syria and in Mesopotamia. So in short, again, my research was, when and how did the term Syriac or Syrian came to be attached to the Christians of Kerala? And as a small community of Christians, which every Christian is aware of, we live in a huge majority Hindu country. We are, on an all-India basis, we are only 2 or 3% as Christians, although in Kerala the percentage is about 30 plus. And how on earth did we survive without being persecuted to extinction? That is, again, something that was interesting to me. And naturally, then the third question was, where did we get episcopal provenance, which means where did our bishops come from? Who sustained us through the centuries that have gone now, 20 centuries, and someone must have supported us. So what was the episcopal provenance? And then wherever there were so many contradictions and contrary narratives, I decided to make this inquiry on what was the doctrinal position, because that is also a very highly contested field in this Syrian Christian's history. So my thesis, in short, is the identity of the Jacobite Syrian Christians of Kerala. How do they say it? What do they say? That is my question.
Okay, Sarah Knight, that is very interesting. So basically, you went after your own identity, which is
Exactly.
something that very few people do, especially considering that we are a minority, like you said, and there are many controversies surrounding our identity. For you to do such a deep research in that area is quite challenging, and that is really commendable. So, as I understand it, you tried to define the terms Jacobite, Syrian, Orthodox, which is very casually used. These terms are very casually used by us, but you really went on to find its identity. That's very interesting, Sarah Knight.
Thank
And
you. Thank you.
Now, moving on to Susan Thomas. So, how was your research? How did it go on? What were the areas that you went into deep searching? What factors did you go into? Did you look into?
Yeah, as I said, I was basically concentrating on these leaves just to show our audience what I am talking about when I say the palm leaves in the churches. I would just like to show them this. Uh, as you see on the screens, are the bundles of palm leaves that I found in Kurupambadi, on which I had done my researches. This is how a small palm leaf showing the account would read. This is just one half of it because it's a very long palm leaf. We have only shown, we took the, we to for clarity, we have taken picture in parts. This is a Kolertha manuscript from the same place, while this is a receipt of a tax receipt that was given by the Ashamanur Panchayat of the Travancore state, erstwhile Travancore state, on lands that were taken on rent uh, by the church and in those period time. What you would see is that these are the palm leaf accounts, and I realized that you were able to get the glimpses of everyday life. A Christian habitat is wide open. I looked at the power relationships within the church. What are the power structures in the parish? What is the relationship of the parish with higher ecclesiastical authority? What was the religious and the ritual life like? What are the transactions that the church had with its own parish members of the locality, institutions like the state, the temples, the landlord community, with the judiciary? Did the church does have certain judicial powers at that same? So social uh, cultural aspects were dealt with. And another thing that I looked into was what was the role that the church played in the emerging capitalist economy of the 18th and 19th century. In short, this is a local history. That I had looked at of the history of the region, history of the area, to understand. The next thing I looked in was to understand community formation, because you would see that initially during this period is the period when we form our identities that we have, what we have today. Uh, those identities are very crucial to us. So I looked at how the Puttanguru and the Parekuru were looking at, have molding their people, and intense community formation was taking at that place. And this was done through by looking at the codes, rules, regulations, the canons that the church passed during the centuries, in course of centuries. I looked at from the time of the synod right down to the 19th century. Then I looked at Sunday school history a bit in between with another professor of the Central European University, Vlad, and that brought me into Sunday school magazines, which I was able to get, and that and then a small advertisement in the magazine caught my attention because it advertised about a Christian women's magazine that would teach Bhartu Dharmam, Bharya Dharmam, and there were a lot of other things. And my antenna was upped by this advertisement. So I went hunting around for these magazines, and I was able to get the Kraistava Mahila Mani, which was advertised in the Sabadasan, which the advertisement I had happened to see, and I was able to get 11, 12 copies or issues of 1 year. So I looked at these magazines to understand the molding that was happening, engendering that was happening. Of the community, how the community was forming. So basically, these are the three main prong areas that I looked at.
Okay, Susan Thomas, that is equally interesting, especially doing research on family scrolls. That really ignites all our interest. Like our viewers are now saying, that's a very interesting topic. And even you went like searching for our identity. And the meaning behind various terms like Puttankur, Parekur, which we just hear. Like people like me have just randomly heard because I've not done any research in the field of history. So this really interests me that you really went after palm leaf scrolls and what they meant and their deep meaning. So that's very interesting. So both of you have done really interesting works. So as we learn more about what you did your research on, what interests me is how did you manage to find sources? That is what makes me curious, because while we do research in a certain area, there are many factors that help us. So both of you look like you had enough support from family, but you need enough scholars also with you in this area who can help you out. And most importantly, we need literature, because that is the base upon which we build our research. So but considering that these topics are very interesting, and very few people go into this area, so I am presuming that there might be very little literature in this area, like reliable literature. So considering all these factors, I want to know how difficult it was for you to do research in this area. Was there lack of resources, lack of guidance? So what all difficulties did you face when you moved on, when you went through your research? So Saranai, can you enlighten us on this?
Yes, as I said, I was changing discipline. So one of the biggest problems at the very outset was going back to the master's level of study. I couldn't go directly into research, however much I claimed that I knew enough, I had enough background reading. So but the English system of universities in the postgraduate level onwards is that you should identify a potential supervisor. I think in India they are called guides. In England they are called supervisors. And you need to find somebody who is interested in the subject, and somebody who is also a scholar in the subject. Now, unfortunately, although Cambridge was a center for Syrian Christian history and research into Syriac language in the 19th century, in the 20th century, that is not so. However, Oxford still has a great and famous faculty of Syriac studies, of which Professor Sebastian Brock was one of the famous professors in that department. Other than Cambridge, the next best place was SOAS in London. And eventually I was able to put together a research program, research proposal, and I was able to find a guide there. But that was only the beginning of my problems. Because as you said, Princy, for a researcher, data, as you say, is vital to get anywhere in your studies and inquiries. Data was very, very few and far between. And in my case, there were a lot of ancient manuscripts and from the European phase in India, from the Portuguese period and the Dutch period and the British period, and in Malayalam, written by very many scholars. However, the biggest problem I personally faced was all these were contradictory to each other. And also my own understanding, as I mentioned earlier, I had brought back from Kerala a huge number of books which were my father's and which I had inherited. So those books said one kind of history, and that was going against the grain, against the dominant and received narrative of the Jacobite Syrian Christians of Kerala. And so this was the biggest hurdle. And I had to persevere and read. Before I started reading any scholarly accounts of history, I started reading just catalogs. Where are the big collections of books, and what are those books, in what language are they in? And by the grace of God, one day at a midnight hour, I was reading the catalogue of Leiden University in the Netherlands, Leiden, Leiden University in Holland or Netherlands. And to my amazement, I was half asleep, but I was shaken awake by reading a title, Malayalathulla, Suryani Christianigalka, Bhavicha Bhavidangal. And that is written in English. Sorry, it is written in Dutch, but of course the characters are English, and I could barely read it. And you can imagine I was shocked. Here is a Malayalam document, and the title is in Malayalam. So from that point onwards, I made it a point to go there and see it. And eventually, I found out that this was a letter written by a Syrian Christian in almost certainly 1720 to the Dutch governor at the time. And there the letter is an appeal to the Dutch colonial powers to protect the Syrian Christians because they were suffering very many adverse circumstances. So luckily for me, the person who wrote this letter prefaces his appeal with a long history of the Syrian Christian Church. So if you'll be patient with me, I don't have it on the storyboard yet, so I'll show it to you what it looks like. You can see there. So
Yeah.
it is a long paper, about 1.5 meters long, and it is stored in the library, rolled up like a scroll, and it's written in very small letter. Well, of course, one can read it, not very big letters. And I arranged for the library to send it to me in high definition digital copy. And from once I came back to England, I was able to study that. And then from there onwards, I was able to take each point mentioned by the writer of that appeal and widen my search. And of course, naturally, then, according to my supervisory committee's advice, I centered my thesis on that. That means you produce a critical edition. First of all, you transcribe it into modern Malayalam and then explain every terminology and explain the meaning of what he was trying to convey. So, interestingly, it begins with St. Thomas, goes through all the milestones of Syrian Christian history, and he says at the very end, maybe last 2 or 3 lines, he says, "This is my appeal." So it was fascinating in that sense, because the purpose of writing itself was almost added as an afterthought. The history was more important. And I was very lucky. I was very lucky that I must admit, the luck also came. Princy and Susan, this period we live in is an amazing period in human history. Here we have, at the touch of a keyboard button, we can access digitized books from all over the world.
Yeah.
So that was a tremendous help in my case, where once you get a hint of something somewhere, you go to websites like archive.org. I mean, I bow before archive.org, and I bow before God and praise and raise up thanksgiving for this website. I have been able to see scores of documents and ancient books and books that are out of publication, which I could never have accessed otherwise. And of course, they are all in tiny print. And my husband was very kind, got so many things printed for me, because after some time your eyes start hurting reading on a screen. So I was able to put together a huge amount of historical accounts and base my thesis on that. Thank you, Princy. I think I've spoken too long.
No, Saranai, that was very interesting because it shows how much of work you had to do, even to get literature
Hmm.
and to test its authenticity. Like you said, you got books from your grandfather, but when you compare them with the available literature, you found differences. So you had to actually validate the resources you had. So it's not just like
Indeed.
you get books from somewhere and then you can be so sure about it because your area was so different. You had to actually rethink whether what you had was authentic before you actually used it for your research. So and now, like you said, technology has been a great blessing for
Hmm.
us. So because of that, we have more availability of resources, and I'm sure
Hmm.
your work will add on to the to the pool of resources now for future students who are coming. So if more people like you do research and publish their work, I think it will be easier for the upcoming generations. But in spite of all this, suppose there was a person, a student, who wanted to pursue research in this area. So, Susan Thomas, what do you think? What would you tell that person? How easy or how difficult would it be for a prospective student to do research in such areas like how you both are doing?
As Sarah said, it's this wonderful age that we live in with all the digitization and with the click of the button, there are a lot of things that we have in our hand. When I started my research, I had to go to the archives, I had to go to the different libraries, and I see my students just Googling it and bringing it, from far corners of the world. And that's really a big plus that is there for research, and also the connectivity that is there between scholars. There are so many groups that are there who are engaged in such kinds of work. So that way, I would say for the students, it's not very difficult if you have the interest and the passion for what you're doing. That is the most important thing. You need that interest, you need that passion, and mostly you need to work hard. This is not an easy thing. You really have to burn the midnight oil. It's just like how Sarah was saying, right in the middle of the night she saw her Matthew Vetekunayal manuscript. And I would think that there's no dearth of sources also now. When I came, my professor told me, but you don't have any sources. Now we have a lot of sources. As I said, we have 6 to 7 terabytes of material. You want Syriac, we have Syriac. You want Gershuni, you have Gershuni. You want Malayalam, you have Malayalam. So all these are there, and it's just material that needs to be unearthed. So what it takes for a student, for example, you either need to know your Syriac well, in the case of palm leaf, because that's where I was looking into. I was somebody who picked up Malayalam after I came here. Though my mother was very insistent we learn, and she used to put a tutor when we used to come down during our holidays. That helped a lot, because the initial lessons were there, though I would forget when I came back the next year. But then reading old Malayalam for people who know Malayalam is not at all very difficult. Only thing is that you have these numerals that are written in Malayalam. So you have charts that are there in these books, and we have also, I through the research, have made a chart of numerals from different churches that have worked. We have somebody else who has worked under me on 2 Catholic church palm leaves. So we have a whole number of symbols and other things we have collated. So now it's not very difficult to read these things. So it's just the patience that you need to have when you go to the palm leaves, because pouring over them is not very easy. Most of them are digitized, so you need to really spend your time, be rooted to where you are from dawn to desk on your research table to work. I think that's all that's needed for the people today.
Okay, Susan Thomas. So, two terms I noticed: patience and passion. So, these two are really important, I can see, doing research in any area, especially in such an area. So, somebody was asking just now, how can this be useful for our next generation? So, like we said, now it's become easier for people for the next generation to do research in this area. But in spite of all this, there are people who ask you, like how Susan Thomas mentioned, like your uncle said, why history? Like people ask, why history? So, and then it's how the kids are brought up right from their young age. So maybe as they grow up, they hear about these bread and butter subjects such as technology and medicine, which is very essential and very equally important. But is it a bit unfair to, feed it into them right from the start? Shouldn't they be realizing the importance of subjects like these? So, what would you have to tell them? Why history? Why study history? Why go after your own identity? Why do you want to seek out your own identity? What is the importance in this age? So, Sarah Knight, what do you have to tell us about that?
I have been in the company of young people all my life as a university lecturer. And it is my firm belief, as is, of course, supported by psychologists, that self-knowledge, knowledge about ourselves, gives us inner strength and confidence in ourselves. And our ability to understand where we fit into the wider world is equally important. So, in order to do that, one must know one's own community. And if one is part of a religious community, where and how it originated and its standing in the world. All these give us greater knowledge of ourselves and an awareness of our place in the broader world. After the corona crisis, and the lockdown that went with it, one of the things almost all humanity has learned is that deep down, everything in life acquires meaning and importance only in its relation to family, loved ones, and the extended community. And if that is the case, it's all the more important, I feel, for the upcoming generation to start with understanding, generating that desire. I need to know who I am, and then enter the path of studying, reading, inquiring about it, talking to those who are a little more knowledgeable than you are. And of course, there is always the caveat or the condition that one must always read and listen to people with a critical mind. Coming from India, I share with many people in India who have that inherent veneration of books. We respect books, and we respect what somebody has said in books. And so my earnest plea to the upcoming generation, from my experience of 7 years of this doctoral project, is that not everything printed is true. Reading history is a very nuanced activity. One must have one's critical and thinking skills very, very sharp. But of course, once you read a lot of historical accounts, it enhances our ability to read critically, to search for the truth, to investigate, and to verify information. And this is very valuable, not only in our religious inquiry, but also in this age of fake news and propaganda. Read critically and evaluate your source. And yeah, that is my advice. Yes, if that is of any value to the young people. I maybe if there's time allowing, I have a couple more things to talk about bread and butter subjects, but I'll come back to you, Princy. I've spoken too long now.
Thank you, Sarah Knight. Yes, that was very valuable advice, especially about the importance of studying history, especially in difficult times like this during a pandemic. It is very true that once you learn more about your own roots, where you come from, your own identity, one feels a sense of respect and dignity for themselves. That's very true. So,
Indeed.
and about reading, that is a culture which is going down which has a downward trend, a steep downward trend, including myself, I can say it's very difficult nowadays because everyone's glued to their phone or the screen. But it's very important to read books and to read more and to understand your your roots and the history where you're coming from. That makes one confident about themselves. So the advice you give to this generation holds great value. So now, if you narrow history down to our church history, why are we holding this discussion today? So, both of you have tried to investigate more about our church, our tradition, the richness of our culture. So, why does the younger generation need to learn more about this? Why do we need to discuss more about this? So, what do you have to say about that, Sarah Knight? Why do we hold discussions like this in today's era?
Well, in my understanding, I may be wrong in this, um, studying history in general and studying church history in particular is not a popular subject. And I must include myself. When I was young, I wouldn't have dreamt of studying history. English literature was far more fashionable and much more interesting. However, this is a false idea, a false notion, because coming to live and work in Cambridge, I realize the the reason why, one of the reasons why, sorry to modify that, one of the reasons why England, even after it has lost its empire, is a vibrant and strong, forward-looking, happy country and a fantastic society, because they have a very clear idea of their history. And that is because in my encounters in so many different arenas in Cambridge, there is a healthy proportion of young people. There are two main universities in Cambridge. In both these universities, there's a healthy proportion of young people studying history. And I have often wondered about this and made inquiries and asked people how they came into this. And also, I can understand because I'm part of that academic fraternity. Um, it is not just history. Once you start studying history, you are engaged in the classical period. You are going back 2,000 years or more back. You are studying about civilization, literature, philosophy, all the ancient religions, and of ancient times, of how life was. And we are lucky that in the present day, these subjects are available for study for the present generation. Um, I don't know about Susan. Susan is much younger than I am. In my time, there were very few opportunities to study Syriac or church history. So it is my point of encouragement to young people that if you inquire, if you look hard enough, you will be able to find university courses in Syriac and Pahlavi and Coptic and Amharic, and also uh, purely church history or doctrine or patristics or even archaeology. Any of these subjects can bring you back into a narrowed area or even a broader area. Encourage all those who are able to seek these subjects and study them is my present mission in life, I think, because my PhD is only a very, very small drop in the ocean. I have only presented pointers, directions for the next generation to pick up, because my topic was very broad. I hope future generations will pick up each of those minute points and write PhDs on that. And that is what we need. And that will be fascinating for them. So earlier there was the expression bread and butter subject. I would like to exhort young people, encourage and enthuse young people with the added piece of information that studying history and church history are not dead-end subjects. There are jobs to be had. Luckily, there are universities and faculties and departments that specialize in these areas. And so you should be encouraged by that and, and go forth into the study of the subject. Thank you, Princy.
Thank you, Saranai. Thank you for telling us how important it is for the younger generation to learn more about our church history. Because, like they say, when the roots are not strong, it's easy to be swayed by the wind. So, if you do not know where you're rooted, I think it is easy to be swayed by opinions of others. So, if you need to remain strong in your faith, wherever it is important that you understand the roots of your faith. So I think both of you are doing research in a very important area. And thank you for inspiring us to learn more about this. And I'm sure if any of the younger people are listening to this conversation or their parents, I'm sure it has inspired them at least a little bit to learn more about our history. So, thank you, both of you, for being here with us and for discussing so many things. And it would be great if you could share any of your publications with us in our future sessions. So, I had a very good time discussing so many things with you, especially coming from a different area of research. Listening to all of your experience was a major opportunity for me also to learn more. So, thank you, both of you, for being there on the show with us today. I'm sure our viewers might have enjoyed watching you just as much as I enjoyed interviewing you both. So, to all our viewers, until we see next time, thank you for being there with us. So, Sarah Knight and Susan Thomas, do you have anything else to add?
Sarah?
I'm here. Well, thank you for being a wonderful host. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Sarah Knight.
also, yeah, thank you
Thank you,
also
Prince.
to Urho the Way for inviting me to this forum. And I'm very grateful. And hopefully we'll meet again.
Yes, it was an honor having both of you here today. So, until we see next time, may God bless all of us. Thank you for being there.
Thank you,
God
Princy,
bless.
for being there here, inviting us. As we wind up this program, let's hope that we have inspired young people to come into history and do more on history. Because, my favorite quote about history is those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. But we never do seem to learn, we tend to forget that, and
Very
we
much.
keep on repeating a lot of things that we could have avoided. And in the world that we are in today, history is very important because it tells us who you are. It gives us, it inculcates in the younger generation certain value systems through the ages, what it is like. Change is essential. Change is the key thing about history, but we don't realize that. And many a times we cling on to a lot of other things. For example, Eric Hobsbawm had said, something called the invention of tradition. We just hark back to things and say, oh, this has been our tradition for so many years, not knowing our true traditions. So by going into history, I hope that 1,000 people will bloom, and programs that you are doing, like the Urho and others are doing, to introduce the young people to history would be a step further in this direction. Thank you so much for having us here. It has been a privilege and a pleasure on my side to be with both of you in this evening. Have a good evening.
May I add one more word? The word diaspora is very important these days. When from Syria, where our mother church is, and from Kerala, our population is scattered all over the world. And there is a grave danger of us becoming rootless, of us becoming individual, minute microcosms in the whole world of humanity. So, as Princy said, when the roots are deep, no wind can blow you over. And that is what we should seek. Find out who we are, stick together. Thank you again to the Urho the Way platform, especially, and to you, Princy. Brilliant interviewer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
both
you.
of you. Thank you.
Thank you.